All right, the newsroom. The newsroom, Bob. So I actually want to start with something I liked about this episode.
Oh, nice.
I appreciated how they unraveled step by step how Genoa fell apart right before their eyes. I was drawn into the nitty gritty in a way that I'm not usually drawn in to the newsroom. And I wasn't bored, which, as you know, is one of my major complaints with the season, and I would much rather be infuriated than be bored with the newsroom at least.
Good. Check, check, and check for me too. I enjoyed all those things, and I feel like the newsroom is starting to pick up, not in a way that redeems it from the first few episodes that were kind of boring in some ways, but it I guess better late than never, nonetheless.
Yeah, so props to Sorkin and crew for a well-constructed hour of TV. So to talk a little bit more about that, it is interesting how the last episode they were all, hey, let's go for it, everything looks great, and then we just see how little by little they get a few things that make them question it. They have to discuss whether Sweeney is credible for caring so much that he lied about his injuries, which have the symptoms of memory loss. You have to consider whether Stomtanovich's, that general's anger, is worth taking seriously because people could just have second thoughts and be angry. And it was interesting seeing them wrestle with those sorts of questions. And then Mac, she finally discovers the doctor tape, and I was bracing myself when she brought that big shot clock into the room. I was worried she was going to try and time the whole thing or something strange like that, and like, okay, timers go. But she just used the basic concept of a shot clock to check the shot clock on the video and to check the continuity there. And I breathed a sigh of relief that it wasn't too nutty.
Yeah, and of course it's easy for us to be like, oh, you should have seen that before. It's obvious, the background, the TV changes, but I mean, we know the whole premise and the whole story, and maybe we can let it slide that they're expert journalists and don't look for those things so closely until they have to. Because they were going on the word of the dude that gets fired that it was legitimate and that it was a fully unedited tape. Um, did you feel like all of the components that led them to believe, like they had 4 sources or 5 sources and everything lining up, is the perfect storm for it to be a great story, and you feel bad for them? Well, I guess I have 2 thoughts. One is you feel bad because they don't really deserve it. It's not like there was a huge amount of negligence. They had all these like almost over-the-top red team meetings and so many people checking into everything in a way that to me felt very thorough. But then the show sets it up so even despite all that thoroughness, stuff all comes together in a perfect way to where they still get screwed. So my 2 questions are: A, is it believable to you that's how it should work out, or that could happen? And B, do you feel bad for them?
Funny you should bring this up. Um, I have my own take sort of prepared on this, which may get around to answering your questions.
Okay.
But here's how I'm going to deal with this question of yours, Bob.
Okay.
Okay, so the newsroom is trying. It's really trying. I'll give it props for that. I think it did want us to feel bad for those characters. But I'm sort of annoyed with the way they were trying to be so manipulative and tug at the heartstrings with that. So, if we take a step back and look at this whole Genoa thing, they almost did something really cool with it, I think. The show could have explored the dangers of groupthink and confirmation bias and perverse incentives and all that. They sort of took a step in that direction, but they made a hard left turn. They could have made our heroes, because let's face it, heroes is how we're supposed to think of these characters. But they could have made our heroes actually have to face one of their own making a major mistake. But as it turns out, a ton of the blame can be placed on outsider Jerry, who no one really ever trusted anyway,
Right.
and then on this guy who ended up wanting to stick it to Charlie. Our heroes' instincts had been correct the whole time. It's just that there were evildoers out there who they couldn't have accounted for. They can't be blamed for people coming into their home and lying to them and pulling the wool over their eyes.
When you put it that way.
There's no real need for these people to ask tough questions about what went wrong for themselves. The so-called institutional, what do they call it? Institutional failure is just something that they give lip service to because no one we actually care about made a mistake. They were deceived, and I'm annoyed by that, to be quite honest.
Oh, I can see that. And now you put it that way, frame it that way. Yeah, I mean, it is very convenient that none of them, they were all taken advantage of in a way that isn't fair because they're super smart people. And if people were playing by the rules, then this wouldn't have happened. It would have been nice if one of them got something wrong, just like even slightly.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Because you're right. The way they have it set up is it's really easy to absolve all of our heroes of any real blunders or any blindness or any unprofessionalism or any moral failings or anything like that. And so if you take that at face value, yeah, you feel bad for them. They were hoodwinked. They taken the blame for something they didn't do. But I'm just annoyed that the show is manipulating us like that.
Right. Now, are you as annoyed at that as you are at the person who hoodwinked them is also suing them, and the whole reason for all these lawyers in the room and these flash forward scenes, which by definition can annoy me anyway, is because uh, they're getting sued for wrongful termination, which
Yeah,
I'm
they
like,
just threw that out casually this time. But, being a lawyer, I'm like, wait a second. This
what
whole
time out?
thing is for wrongful termination? Seriously? Got 5 lawyers in a deposition. Do you know how much that costs for wrongful termination?
Seriously, this guy must be loaded for being terminated, and needing his job and money. He's got quite the crew.
Yeah, so I thought that was a little bit of a letdown, anticlimactic. I thought, because they gave us a hint that maybe the Department of Defense was going to really come after them big time or something
Right.
for slander, and that would have been high stakes. But it's wrongful termination bullshit. No, that was a letdown.
All of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, who cares how this goes? They're not going to be. Nobody's being thrown in jail as a result. It's just they have to pay out some money, and Jane Fonda's character doesn't want to because she has her drunken soapbox speech in this episode or whatever.
So, in the background of all this, we see that Benghazi is starting to happen, and they're pros again. So everyone knows that it's a terrorist attack and not a spontaneous demonstration. Naturally, um, but
Naturally.
they chicken out, I guess, and they go with the White House's story. Now, this is recent enough that I can sort of remember it, and
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily someone with a huge bug up my ass about Benghazi, but it seems like there is room for criticism of the Obama White House on how it was handled. And so I'm a little intrigued. We haven't really had much actual Sorkin criticism of Obama yet, have we? Help me remember.
No, we just had the one soapbox speech from last time when Jerry's character was like, "You just want to turn the other way because you all love Obama so much," and he was just doing that in character to cover his tracks of having doctored the tape and
Yeah, and
wanting
we
them.
already knew that he was a bad guy when he was saying that, right?
Right. So it wasn't really a criticism because it was coming from a bad guy. uh,
So
yeah.
I'll have my eye out for how Sorkin deals with that.
But it is kind of convenient that Sorkin had this whole backstory of Genoa to make it so that, because this would have been real news for the newsroom to, like, if they were the only network that actually covered it the appropriate way from the get-go, um, that would have been an alternate history. But since that's not what happened and the show's based on history, it's almost like too convenient. They're like, oh, and they got it wrong too, because if they couldn't get it right, because then that would change history.
That's true. It seems like it would have changed history. Like it would have been big in the debates and the fallout from Romney and blah blah blah. Anyway, I'll be intrigued to see how they deal with that. I hope they do it well.
Yeah, we'll see.
Any final words, Bob?
Oh, it's picking up for me. I enjoy the show. I like the characters now for the most part, some more than others, but it's endearing. I'm sticking with it. It's fun.
Right on. So for me, my final take is the overarching problems really are not completely resolved, but I always like when I can be reminded about the show's technique, the way they can execute on what they're trying to do, and just the craftsmanship. So we're still sticking it out.
All right, cool.